She was good, she was kind, and you killed her!
The deadliest piece of evidence in Game of Thrones is a toy, not a poisoned necklace, not a Valyrian steel dagger, a small wooden stag carved by a smuggler's hands, burned black in a fire that should never have been lit. And in this scene, that little toy flies across the great hall of Winterfell and does what no army, no assassin, and no god ever managed. It puts the Red Woman on trial and wins. So here's my case for today. This confrontation between Davos and Melisandre is the show operating at its absolute peak, a full murder trial compressed into a few minutes, with no court, no laws, and a hopelessly compromised judge. Because the man deciding the verdict, Jon Snow, owes the accused his literal heartbeat. On paper, Melisandre cannot lose this trial. She resurrected the judge, and yet she loses everything, not to evidence, not to witnesses, but to the sheer, breaking power of one grieving man's voice. That's the thesis this scene proves. In a world of magic and crowns, raw human conviction is still the heaviest weapon in the room. Quick context. We're in Season 6, Episode 10, in the Great Hall of Winterfell, freshly retaken from the Boltons after the Battle of the Bastards. A season earlier, Melisandre burned Princess Shireen, Stannis' daughter, the sweet girl who taught Davos how to read, at the stake as a sacrifice for a campaign that failed anyway. On the morning of the battle, Davos found the proof in the snow, the pyre's ashes, and in them, the charred remains of the wooden stag he'd carved for her. Melisandre, meanwhile, has since pulled Jon Snow back from the dead. Now, the scene doesn't open with the accusation. It opens with something much quieter, and the writing here is razor sharp. Jon and Melisandre are alone in the hall, and Jon is remembering the feasts of his childhood, how his family sat up on the dais while the bastards sat down below with the lesser men. And Melisandre gently pushes back.
Could have been worse, Jon Snow. You had a family. You had feasts.
Jon even admits it.
You're right. I was luckier than most.
It's a warm little exchange, and it's a trap the episode sets for her. Because this woman comforting Jon about family is about 60 seconds away from being exposed as the person who took a child from the closest thing that girl had to a second father and burned her in front of her actual parents. The show lets Melisandre speak tenderly about family one final time, so the truth lands harder when it walks through the door. And it walks through the door in the form of Davos Seaworth, carrying his grief in a closed fist. Follow that little stag's journey for a second, because the show has been building this prop for a full season. Davos carved it himself, a gift for the girl who sat with a low-born smuggler and patiently taught him his letters. He gave it to her right before being sent away on an errand he never suspected. One of the last kind moments of her life. She kept it. It went into the flames with her. It survived her. And Davos pulled it out of the ashes with his own hands on the morning of a battle he still had to go fight. Everything he feels for that child, and everything that was done to her, lives inside one piece of charred wood. So he doesn't announce the crime. He doesn't draw steel. He tosses the burnt stag straight at her, and she catches it. Think about how brutal that single beat of staging is. He could drop it at her feet, wave it in her face, hand it to Jon. Instead, he makes her body betray her. Her own hands reach out and catch the evidence, and now the killer is standing in front of the king, holding the burned toy of the child she put on the pyre, staring down at it. The transcript's stage direction says it plainly. She looks down at it in shame. Before one word of the trial is spoken, the accused is already holding the exhibit. Then Jon asks the only question he can ask.
What is that?
And Davos does the smartest thing in the entire scene. He refuses to answer. He makes her do it.
Tell him who it belonged to.
You see, Davos understands something most characters in this show never figure out. If he tells the story, it becomes his word against the most persuasive woman alive, a woman whose entire power is talking kings into things. An accusation can be argued with, a confession can't. So he forces the great voice of the Lord of Light to narrate her own crime out loud in front of the man she resurrected. Her weapon was always her voice. He turns it into the prosecution's star witness, and she answers. This is where the scene stops being a confrontation and becomes something genuinely chilling, because Melisandre does not lie, does not soften, does not dodge.
You burned her at the stake.
No glamour, no riddles, no prophecy speak. And when Davos demands to know why, she explains it the way a quartermaster explains a hard call. The army was trapped, the horses were dying. It was the only way. Look at what the show is doing here. Her honesty almost reads as courage, right? But underneath, it's the scariest thing about her. She isn't confessing to a crime. She's defending a decision. In her mind, this was policy, approved by her god, signed off by the girl's own parents, a point she actually raises in her defense, that Shireen's father and mother consented. As if that helps. As if that isn't worse. Now, Davos breaks. And I want to spend a moment on Liam Cunningham here, because this explosion is 5 seasons in the making. Davos has been the single calmest presence in this entire story. The man who talks kings off ledges. The reasonable voice in every unreasonable room. We have never heard him roar. So when it finally comes, when he screams that she burned a little girl alive and then delivers the line that carries the whole scene,
I loved that girl like she was my own.
his voice doesn't just rise, it tears. That's the sound that changes the trial, because everything Melisandre says is calm, structured, certain. And this is a man bleeding through his own words. But notice that even inside the rage, Davos out-argues her too. He doesn't debate her god. You can't out-scripture a priestess. Instead, he audits the results. The sacrifice was meant to save the army. The army was annihilated. It was meant to crown Stannis. Stannis is dead. The parents who consented died with him. Everyone that fire was supposed to save is gone, which means a child burned for exactly nothing. And when Melisandre reaches for her last defense, that she never lied, she hands him the most damning sentence of her life. She wasn't lying.
I was wrong.
I mean, sit with how much scarier that is. A liar can stop lying. A true believer who was wrong will be wrong again, with total certainty, and next time, it's someone else's child on the pyre. Davos even throws it straight back at her. Fine, you were wrong, so how many died for it? Meanwhile, watch the judge. Jon says almost nothing in this scene, and the camera keeps cutting back to him, because the whole trial is really happening on his face. Understand his position. Jon never met Shireen, never heard her read, never saw the pyre. To him, this dead girl is a name attached to a burned toy. Melisandre is no abstraction at all. Not long before this, Jon was a corpse on a table, and this woman brought him back. Whatever the biggest debt is that one person can owe another, Jon owes it to her, and Davos, for all their months together, can't compete with a resurrection. On paper, this verdict was decided before the stag left Davos's hand, and yet Jon rules against her. Why? Because Jon has spent his life learning to read men on the wall among wildlings in war, and he knows what real sounds like. Grief like Davos's can't be performed. The moment that voice tears, Shireen stops being a name and becomes a person, and no debt in the world makes burning her acceptable. Spare a thought for Melisandre too, because the show refuses to make her a cartoon. From where she stands, this is the day her whole existence collapses. She staked a life far longer than anyone in that room could guess. We've seen what waits under that necklace. On Stannis being the chosen one, and she was wrong, and a child screamed in a fire because of it. And some part of her already knows this is the same woman who came back to Castle Black hollowed out, sitting alone in the dark, confessing to Davos that everything she saw in the flames was a lie.
I've been ready to die for many years.
Believe her. Her only remaining card is also true. The Night King is coming, the dead are marching, and she can help win that war. Her best defense, after a lifetime of prophecy, boils down to, "You'll need me before the end." That's how far she's fallen. And here's the deeper layer, because Jon's verdict is remembered as mercy, and it isn't, not really. Davos asks leave to execute her. Even in fury, this man requests permission, because the smuggler is more lawful than the lords. Melisandre offers her usefulness, and Jon splits the difference like a man already ruling, banished south that same day, a hanging waiting if she ever returns. He satisfies justice enough to keep Davos and keeps the witch alive and pointed at the Night King just in case. He banks her, and the cold part. Jon knows exactly what full justice looks like. He hanged the men who murdered him, including a boy. His own killers got the rope. Shireen's killer gets a horse and a road south, not because her crime was smaller, because her future was worth more. Davos claims the final word of the scene anyway, and it's not a plea, it's a promise. If she ever comes back this way, he'll execute her himself. Hold that promise, because the show keeps it in the strangest way possible. 2 seasons later, on the night of the battle for the living, Melisandre rides back into Winterfell, back into the reach of that promise, knowing precisely what it means. She tells Davos there's no need for his sentence. She'll be dead before dawn. Then she lights the Dothraki blades, lights the trench when every torch fails, helps save every living soul in that castle. And at sunrise, she walks out into the snow, lets the necklace fall, and turns to dust while Davos stands watching, his execution carried out for him by time itself. Both of them told the truth in that hall. She really was needed for the Great War. And she really did die the moment her work in the North was done. So that's what this scene is. A few minutes, 3 people, no battle, and one of the most powerful confrontations the show ever staged. A smuggler with a burned toy out-argued a sorceress, outweighed a resurrection, and proved that in this entire world of kings and gods, nothing carries further than a breaking voice telling the truth. And it leaves behind the 6 most quietly terrifying words any believer ever spoke. I didn't lie. I was wrong.